Wow. Good morning. My name is Jeff Kottkamp. I have the privilege of serving as the president and CEO of Florida TaxWatch. And I'm pleased to be joined with Kurt Winter, who's our senior vice president of research. And in my view, really the preeminent expert on all things state budget in the great state of Florida. And he's the lead researcher on our annual Budget Turkey Watch report. Florida TaxWatch has been providing this report since 1983, 43 years. And as you probably are aware, this report strives to promote additional oversight and integrity to Florida's budget process. It's based on a principle that because the money appropriated by the legislature belongs to the taxpayers of Florida, the budget process must be transparent and accountable, and every project should receive proper deliberation and public debate. Those that don't are labeled budget turkeys. Let me be clear, though. Florida TaxWatch is providing this report to assist the governor in his budget deliberations, recommending that he not only consider the value and efficacy of a project, but he also considers if each particular item in the budget meets turkey criteria, if it addresses a core state government function, and if it was selected through a fair process that promotes the best interest of the taxpayers statewide. Before we get started, I want to thank each of you for joining us both in person and virtually for the release of the 2026 Budget Turkey Watch report, our independent review of the state budget process. And this is done line by line. It takes hours and hours and hours of work by Kurt and our team to comb through every single line, thousands of lines in the budget. These appropriation projects that have made it in our list violate sound budgeting practices in at least one of the following ways. They circumvent established review and selection processes, or they have passed through the established process but are funded ahead of a much higher priority. So think of the 5-year road project as an example. This is a very strategic, well thought out process with projects across the state that are prioritized by need. Often the legislature will circumvent that process and either jump things well ahead of where they are on the priority list or add things that aren't even on the list, and those will be added into the budget, and that will be scrutinized in our report. Or there's something in the budget that was inserted in the budget conference committee meetings, meaning they didn't even appear in either the Senate or House budget when they passed their initial budget. So things that appear out of essentially thin air at a budget conference meeting. Or they don't adhere to the rules adopted by the Senate and House for appropriations or member projects. They've been in the Senate or House budget, but were removed during the budget committee meeting process, only to be added back later through the supplemental appropriations list or the sprinkle list. Or they're funded through inappropriate trust funds, duplicative appropriations, or appropriations contingent on legislation that did not pass. As someone who is intimately familiar with the inner workings of the Florida legislature, I understand just how important Florida TaxWatch's annual Budget Turkey report is. To be clear, and this is important, by no means are we passing judgment on a project's merit, value, or need. With this report, we are simply holding legislators accountable for Floridians' hard-earned taxpayer dollars. We're telling them clearly, yes or no, whether they followed the long-standing legislatively established processes their tax-paying constituents both demand and deserve. Yes, government should be meaningful and spending should make a positive, lasting difference in our communities. But at the same time, there must be transparency and opportunities for public input before a project makes it in the budget. This year, with the state's $114.5 billion budget, Florida TaxWatch identified 621 appropriation projects worth $829.7 million that qualify as budget turkeys. Let me repeat it. 621 appropriations projects worth $825 million that qualify as budget turkeys. Moreover, while a project may be worthwhile, items identified as budget turkeys tend to serve a limited, not a statewide area. They're often not core functions of state government, are more appropriately funded with local or private dollars, and circumvent well-established budget procedures, competitive selections, oversight, and accountability. Just to give you an example, and this happens year in and year out, and this happened even when I was in the legislature, and this gets to the statewide impact. There was an item in the budget, $500,000 for a flag football field in a local community, a large local community. And it always occurred to me, why should the people of Cape Coral or Crestview or Ocala or anywhere else in the state pay for this? It's one thing if this is a project in a constrained county. It's another if it's just a local project that doesn't have a statewide impact. And those we try to look closely at. Advocating for the hard-working taxpayers of Florida. It's exactly what this report is about when it comes out of stewardship of taxpayer dollars. We should note that both budget turkeys and member projects have proliferated at an accelerated rate in recent years. This is a trend we believe is wholly unsustainable, and Kurt Winter will talk more about that. Finally, as we strongly, this is a very big part of this. As usual, we're encouraging the governor to assess each project we have presented a concern about, a turkey or otherwise, and determine, one, whether its funding is counter to sound budgeting practices, two, if it addresses a core state government function, or three, if it was selected through a fair process that promotes the best interest of tax-paying citizens across Florida. Now I'd like to turn it over to Kurt Winter. Kurt's going to talk through some more specifics and our recommendations. Kurt.
Thank you, Jeff, and thanks to all of you for coming. I want to say a little bit about member projects. Not all member projects are turkeys, but most turkeys are member projects, and there's a lot of member projects in the budget. According to state economists, if state spending continues on the track that it's on, we're going to have some budget shortfalls on the horizon. And in addition, as you all may have heard, the legislature's been rightly criticizing local governments for rapidly increasing budgets, property taxes, calling them to only fund core services, and saying that there's too much wasteful spending. Despite all this, legislators continue to fund billions of dollars for projects in their districts, rewarding local governments that may not be sufficiently protecting taxpayers. While many of these projects could be worthwhile, many more are hardly priorities or even essential. Despite the call for a leaner budget, legislators requested more hometown projects than ever before. House and Senate members submitted more than 5,600 project requests, totaling $12.5 billion. This is more than last year. And most of these projects end up in the budget. The new budget includes nearly 2,000 local member projects worth $2.7 billion. When you consider that almost every member project in the budget is requested by both a senator and a representative, when you average out the ones that are in the budget, the average senator had approximately 45 projects worth $60 million funded, and the average representative had 15 projects worth $20 million. That's each one. This continues a 5-year run that has seen about $14 billion of member projects appropriated in the budget. I'd also like to quickly touch on water projects, which is the biggest place where member projects are. It's the longest list. For years, Florida TaxWatch has recommended a better process for selecting these with review and prioritization by experts. The existing system was inconsistent funding, too many avenues for funding, a large number of member-requested water projects. This made a coordinated statewide planning system difficult to ensure that the money was going to the best projects. So the legislature created 2 such programs with dedicated funding: the Water Quality Improvement Grant Program and the statewide flooding and sea level rise resiliency plan, and with a grant program. These were very good programs. However, this budget earmarks all of the Water Quality Improvement Trust Fund for member projects. So none of the projects will be chosen through that criteria-driven, coordinated, competitive grant process. Since Florida law requires this funding to be used for the Water Quality Grant Program, the legislature had to add a 1-year exemption to the budget implementing bill to allow them to do that. It only lasts for 1 year, but they did it last year too, so they could continue to do that. That's why we moved this year water projects from, if you'll notice, there's another list of about $441 million worth of projects in the back that we're calling for the governor to give extra scrutiny to. Water projects were there this year. This year we moved them into, put a turkey label on the whole line item. Now I'll turn it back over to Jeff for the final remarks.
As always, again, I want to thank Kurt and the research team for their tireless effort on this report. This is not an easy report to put together. As I said, they spend many, many hours. It was a long day and night yesterday as we brought this in for landing. And since our founding in 1979, Florida TaxWatch has proudly served as our state's trusted government watchdog and taxpayer research institute, providing Florida's legislature, policymakers throughout the state with thoughtful recommendations to secure enduring fiscal accountability and strength for the Sunshine State. We anticipate working with Governor DeSantis and our state leaders to implement these measures, increase accountability for every taxpayer dollar spent, ensure the greatest possible return on investment for all Floridians. Thank you again for being here and for covering this important development. We'll be happy to answer any questions. And for those of you in the media participating via Zoom, simply type your question into the chat and we'll read them as time allows. So with that, again, 2,000 member projects. Wow. Mackenzie. They tend to hurt simply because you have a shorter timeline, both to deliberate on these things and then even for the governor, there's less time. Obviously, he still has a couple of weeks before we hit June 30th. But even the timing after that, there's a question of, when the budget actually gets delivered to the governor. Of course, they can look at it, even if it's not officially delivered to them. But I think to answer your question, I don't think it helps to have the extended sessions. The deadline is like in life. A deadline is good. It forces you to get your job done. And it would be more ideal, obviously, if we could complete all of our legislative work in a regular session in the 60 days. Now, it raises a question, that we're a much larger state with much more complicated issues. Is the 60-day session long enough? Well, that's something to be debated separately. Right now, that's what we have. And, I think every effort should be made to get it done in 60 days. Well, as Kurt mentioned, it has proliferated. It's in my view, it's a problem. I mean, 2,000 member projects are in this budget. That's incredible. We're simply every year looking more and more out like Congress. I mean, just spend, spend, spend. I understand that we're equally concerned about increases in taxes and fees on taxpayers, but in this, you also have to look at spending. And whether it's local governments or state government, both taxation and spending are important. And as Kurt said, the forecasts demonstrate that we believe there will be a tightening in the state budget. And so you cannot continue this trend of more and more local projects. You've got to have some discipline.
Jeff, can I add something
Yeah.
real quick? About the growth. I don't know if anybody of you remember, but back in 2017, the legislature instituted rules for appropriation projects, which are member projects. The appropriation, they were good. They increased accountability and transparency, but obviously they didn't slow the growth. When they did that, the speaker then said that these were needed to stem what he called an epidemic of member projects. At that time, there was about 500 member projects in the budget worth about $500 million. Now we have thousands worth, many, many more, 7 times the amount of money since that. If that was an epidemic, what is it now? So it's been an incredible increase. I don't think that those rules help slow the tide at all, even though they are positive for transparency.
What would be an acceptable number of members? 114.
I don't think you can say an acceptable level. You've got to have criteria. That's why we have the budget turkey list. It's one thing if you're talking about one of our 30 or so fiscally constrained counties, and even if it is a fiscally constrained county, is the project that is a core government function. These are you got to have principles for this. You can't necessarily, a certain number are appropriate. But it's funny, I mean, if 500 member projects was an epidemic, then 2,000 is the plague. I mean, this is not sustainable for the long term. And that's really the point made by Kurt in the report.
It's sustainable for property tax. If they were to approve the voters, what does that do to the whole matter of project situation?
Well, it really doesn't. Well, that's a good point. The property tax, of course, is revenue to the local government. I think on the one hand, it doesn't impact it because that's local government revenue, but it will increase requests, won't it? I mean, I think logically you're going to see local governments are going to try to rely even more on their legislators to come here and get member projects simply because their budgets will take a significant hit from the reduction of property tax revenue. Anything you want to add to that?
I want to add something. One thing about member projects is the money has to be non-recurring. It's supposed to only be for 1 year. But if you look at the requests, a lot of them say we're going to need significant money to keep this going, and we'll come back to the state and ask. So either it's going to be a recurring state expense, or the project's going to have to stop if the local government doesn't have enough money. And I think that would increase if there's a significant reduction in local government revenues. So I think Jeff is right. If we do the significant reduction, I think we're going to have more and more member projects.
Quickly read through, maybe I didn't see the new college, the swaps of the USF managed accounts. You people have an adequate review in the house, I don't think it came up except for.
Well, our view is that was something that was discussed a lot, and it was in the budget, or at least the talk of it early. So, and again, it's more of a policy decision than an appropriation thing. So we decided not to include that. You'll find that most of those type of things aren't turkeys or member projects. So we left it off.
That's a good question. It kind of underscores where we're not trying to get into the game of this is a good idea or a bad idea. Just that happened to have been debated openly quite a bit and was in the budget. And you can make your own decision on whether or not that's a good idea. Other questions?
Say there will be more member tests if does that affect your decision making in calling Turkey at that point, or are they more necessary in less Turkey?
The criteria will remain the same. And one of the things, just to be clear on that too, we, well before the budgets were passed, we made, and we've been doing this year in and year out now, we've made sure to publish our criteria both to our members and to the legislature so that they can't come back later and say, well, this is news to us. So we establish this criteria, we make it public. So they're on notice if they're going to put, especially with the sprinkle list. You talk about a process that is the antithesis of what we would like to see the budget process be. It's the sprinkle list, which has gotten larger and larger every year. These last minute things added into the state budget, no opportunity for public input, no opportunity for member debate. And we just don't think it's the appropriate way to spend the people's money. They're about proportionally about the
They're
same.
probably proportionally about the same. One thing is they're identified in the budget with both of the requests, whether or not it was actually in the House or the Senate budget. They'll put both of the requests in there. So it looks like most of them were requested by both, even though they weren't. But we don't track to see who did more. But I think Jeff is right. I have a feeling that it's fairly proportional.
Any questions online?
They asked are there any local projects flagged in Pasco or Fernando counties?
I have to look at the list.
Yeah. I'm sure there are, but if you look at our report, we have the counties where each of the turkeys are located. So should be able to read, or he will be able to read that.
Any significant projects flagged in South Florida?
I can tell you there's a lot in South Florida. And again, it'll all be listed so they can check that in the report.
How would you describe the way that the governor has treated the turkey list
I mean, I would say, if you look back over all the governors, they all have and looked at it closely, considered it significantly, and we probably see 50 to 75% of budget turkeys often vetoed. So I think it definitely plays a role. This particular governor isn't necessarily any more or less than other governors. They have all considered this in their deliberations. Any other questions? Well, thank you all for being here. Have a great day.